Welcome to Rambam in Depth. Today we're going to be discussing the Rambam in Hilchos Tefilah, Perek Yud Gimel, Halacha Vav. The Rambam writes as follows: Shmein Pesukim shebeseif haTorah. The last 8 Pesukim of the Torah, mutar lekreis eisan bebeis hakneses bepachas ma'asara. You're allowed to read it in the shul, even with less than 10 people. Even though all of it, even the last 8 Pesukim, are part of the Torah that we heard from Moshe, that we heard from the Almighty, since they imply that it's talking about after his passing, so they're different. These 8 Pesukim have a different status. And that's why even an individual, not without a minyan, could read it. So the Rambam is based on a Gemara in Baba Basra, in which it says that the last 8 Pesukim of the Torah, which talk about Moshe's passing, so one opinion says that Moshe didn't write it, Yeshua wrote it, and the other opinion says Moshe wrote it, but he wrote it with tears. That means that, simple pshat, he was crying while he wrote it. So these 8 Pesukim have a different status, and therefore the Rambam says, based on the Gemara, that even a yachid, even an individual, could read it. That's how he translates and interprets the words of the Gemara. The Ravid disagrees with the Rambam, and he says, we never heard such a thing. And when the Gemara says yachid, kaira eisan, that even a yachid could read it, doesn't mean a yachid is opposed to a tzibur. Loimar she'einem mafsik behem, that you can't interrupt and stop in middle of these 8 Pesukim, but one person who gets the Aliyah has to read from the beginning of these 8 Pesukim to the end, and not have 2 people being called up to the Torah for these 8 Pesukim. And he brings a Yerushalmi that says the same thing. Rashi and Baba Basra explains it that way as well. And another pshat he gives, when Mekomis halol nogu she'ovel l'sefer Torah, normally, you would have a Balkera reading besides the one, not the one who's called up to the Torah. That custom developed that the Balkera reads it. But when it comes to these 8 Pesukim, no, the one who is called up to the Torah, he's the reader, not with the Balkera. Then the Rabbi says the following: Mashakosav, who inyan zoris ma'id, what he writes is extremely far-fetched. The last comment and criticism is, where did the tzibur go? There were 10, and all of a sudden now, because until then you had to read it with 10, so what happened with the minyan of 10? How do you have a yachid now? So the Rabbi's criticism here seems to be very strange. What do you mean, where did they go? There were 10 people in the shul, and one person left. So you could continue reading it. So what's the big pella on the Rambam? There's a say from Mishnas Yavitz, from Rabbi Zolti, who was the former chief rabbi of Yerushalayim, and the Sefer Mishnas Yavitz, and he says that the Rambam's criticism is understood. It says in the Gemara Megillah that you can't read the Torah with less than 10 people, and Tosfos brings Yerushalmi that if you started with 10, and a few of them go out, you could still finish reading the Torah even though you don't have a minyan. It's not a proper thing to do, and that's how the Rambam paskins in Perek Ches of Hilchos Tefilah. So you need 10, but if you started with 10, you could continue reading. So that's what the Ravid's criticism is. Where did the community go? Where did the tzibur go? In other words, what's the big pell over here that a yachid could read it even without a minyan? It's true about any part of the Torah. You start any part with a minyan, and some of the people leave, you could finish. So why over here should that be any different? So Rabbi Zolti explains it that the Rambam and the Ravid seem to be arguing about another machlekes. There's a machlekes between the Ran and the Sefer HaManhig, one of the Rishonim. When it says in the Gemara in Yerushalmi, that Tosfos brings, that even if people leave, you can still continue reading even though you don't have a minyan, what does that mean? Does that mean you still have Reiv HaTzibur, you have the majority of the Tzibur, and that's why you could still read, because you have the majority? That's the Shita of the Ran. He says clearly, Mistabra, the Dafka ben Ishtayr Ruban, only if the majority is left are you allowed to continue reading. The Sefer Hamanik says no. He says, even if the minyan leaves, v'yikra'en yachid, and only one person, a yachid, is reading it, it's still all right, even though it's only a yachid. What are they arguing about? They're arguing about what is the svara, what is the logic in this halacha of the Yerushalmi that if you started with 10, you could continue even with less than 10. Is it because there's a din that davar shebekdusha you need 10, but that din is only if the beginning needs 10. Even though Sataki, even though there's no minyan at all, you can still read because you started with 10. Or does it mean that since you started with a tzibur and you still have the majority of the tzibur left, it's considered as if you're still continuing to read with tzibur? That's the machlokes between the Ran and the Sefer HaManig. The Ran says no, it's not that the davar shebekdusha suffices to have 10 in the beginning. You need 10 throughout. You need a tzibur throughout. But if you start with 10 and then you continue with a reiva tzibur, it's considered as if you had a tzibur. Whereas the Sefer HaManig holds no, it's because a davar shebekdusha requires beginning with 10. Even if you conclude with 1, it's good enough. So the Rabbi Sholti says that seems to be the machlokes between the Raiv and the Rambam. The Rambam holds like the Ran, that you have to have the Raiv of the Tzibur in order to finish. But if the Raiv left, you cannot finish the Kriyas HaTorah. So that's the Chiddush of the last 8 Pesukim of the Torah, that even though Raiv left and you only have a Yachid or less than a Raiv, nevertheless the Rambam says the halacha is that you could still read the Torah. When it comes to these 8 Pesukim, they're different. The rest of the Torah, if the majority of the minyan leaves, you can't finish. But here, because these 8 Pesukim have a different status, therefore you could even finish with a yachid. The Raiva holds like the Sefer HaManig, that it's based on the idea that a davar shebekdusha needs 10 in the beginning. And therefore, even if the Raiv leaves, he could still read. So the Rabbi says, then what is the Rambam Machadish over here? What is he saying over here then? In these 8 Pesukim, if the minyan leaves, if the tzibur leaves and there's only a yachid, you could read. That's true about the whole Torah, any part of the Torah. As long as you started with a 10, a davar shebekdusha, it's good enough. So that explains beautifully the machlokes of the Rambam and the Raiva. Now to understand the shita of the Rambam, why taka is it enough to have a yachid read the Torah, these 8 Pesukim? Just because they're different, why should that change the status of the chiyuv of a davar shebekdusha requires 10? So perhaps one could say the following. It says in Zohar, the Rambam brings it in his Akdama to his Pirush on the Torah, that the Kol HaTorah Kula Shmeisav Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the whole Torah is considered to be Hashem's name. This explains, it answers a question, why is reading the Torah called a davar shebekdusha? We understand why Kedusha is a davar shebekdusha. You're talking about God's holiness. Kaddish is a davar shebekdusha. We can understand Tefilah is a davar shebekdusha because you're praising Hashem. But why is reading the Torah, you're reading about halachas, mitzvahs, why is that considered a davar shebekdusha? So one svara could be based on that Zohar, that when you read the Torah, you're reading the Eibishter's name. That's what it says in Tanya, that Kaira de B'Torah, when a person reads the Torah, what does that mean? He's Kaira, he's inviting Hashem to come to him. How does that work? So the commentaries on the Tanya explain, because the Torah is Hashem's name. So when you read Torah, you're calling out Hashem's name. Calling out Hashem's name is the davar shebekdusha. That's true about the whole Torah. But the last 8 Pesukim, because there's a different status, because they're either not written by Moshe Rabbeinu himself, or the other opinion of the Gemara, that Moshe wrote it in a different way. He used to, when he gave over the rest of the Torah, he would say the words and then write it. Here he didn't say the words. And even when he wrote it b'dema, with tears. And it could add also, it says that nevuah is only shayra on a person when he's in a state of simcha. That means Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah was perhaps on an inferior level compared to his nevuah at all times. So that detracts from the idea of Yakriya B'Shem, calling out Hashem's name, because there's something lacking over here. That's one svar that's possible. But the Rambam Shita is that the last 8 Pesukim, you could read it even a Yachid, as we said before, even though the Reiv HaTzibur had left. The Reiv Shita is no, you can only read it if the Reiv HaTzibur remained. And the idea of Yachid reading it, the Rabbi learns, the Rashi learns that it means that one person has to read the entire amount. You can't stop in middle and call up a second person.